Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the 13th episode of the AfghanEye podcast. I'm your host Sangar and together with me is Ahmed-Waleed Kakar. Today we have a guest, an author, Erik Edstrom, who has recently published his book called UnAmerican. Erik, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful to be here.
So, Erik, we just before we discuss your book, we would like to just briefly go over your very interesting biography. Waleed.
So, Erik, you graduated from West Point in 2007. You served in Afghanistan as an infantry platoon leader, and you served in the presidential escort platoon under the Obama administration. So, what year was it roughly that you were serving in Afghanistan?
I was in Afghanistan from May of 2009 until June of 2010. So it was just pre-surge in America, and I was in Qandahar province, specifically within Zari, Panjwai, Arghandab, Maywand. I started in Maywand, and we moved further east, closer to Qandahar city during that year.
So, I mean, those were pretty much the hot spots back then.
Yeah, absolutely. It was sort of one of the main areas for roadside bombs and IEDs, which was the major threat both to the civilian populace as well as to soldiers.
So you wouldn't, so I mean, in your experience, you wouldn't say that you faced more of a threat from actual insurgents as much as you did from the IEDs?
Well, the insurgents are in placing the IEDs.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I would say that we faced in total fewer casualties from small arms fire or, RPGs and, basically AK-47s or something like that, and far more casualties from...
Sure. So, I mean, let's dive right into the book, Erik. So the book is called, the title, at least, is Un-American, right? Why did you title that the book as such?
It's a good question, and I get that quite a bit. And it's basically sort of a tongue-in-cheek comment about American patriotism, and that because I have fairly critical views about what America is doing with the war on terror, despite having served in it and having my own lived experience that I share with other people, there's this rich irony sometimes that other people describe me as un-American for having had this experience and saying this isn't right. So there's this sense of what it is to be American, and to be American usually implies not questioning the military and being very pro-military, very pro occupation of other countries, and don't question the military budget. Don't ask too many questions about what they're doing specifically over there, or whether it's adding value to American citizens at home or the people that you're claiming you're allegedly helping. And I describe that as basically lobotomized patriotism, or this brainless sense of patriotism.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned, and so for everyone out there that isn't aware, Erik's book has been published. The first chapter is available online on your website. That's correct, Erik, right? It's on your website? Yeah, sure. So in the first chapter, you actually describe the American military as being a sacrosanct institute, right? That you're not allowed to question whatever. So, I mean, as someone that's obviously been accused of essentially being treasonous, of being unpatriotic in terms of your views, how would you say it is that the American military manages to command such a monopoly on the spectrum of discussion being had with regard to its role abroad?
Also a good question. I mean, it's been this way for a long time. If you look at sort of Win or Gallup polls about what are the most trusted or the institutions that have the greatest amount of confidence for the American public, every year you'll see it as being the military, high in this list, high level of confidence. And that is far above every other sort of public institution you can think of. whether that's the police, which obviously probably even now has taken a further dive, but the church, small business, politicians, any sort of other category of groups or institutions in America is not as well trusted, and there is less confidence in those groups of workers.
I'm really glad you mentioned the police, because obviously right now, as over the last couple of years, there's been this massive discussion about police brutality in America and, the predisposition of police to use wholly disproportionate excessive force. And a lot of people aren't realizing, at least in terms of Afghanistan, those that are, let's say pro-war, whatever, people are not realizing that a lot of these police officers are actually veterans. And that if they are so ready to use this kind of lethal force at home, what does it say about the culture that's imbued in them, domestically, as well as more importantly in this conversation abroad?
I mean, I think that, and it's again horrible that you can't just acknowledge that you shouldn't be treating people that way anywhere, domestically or abroad. And I think it was, to paraphrase a Malcolm X quote, he said, if violence is wrong at home, violence is wrong abroad. And if you apply those same principles, that the police is now being scrutinized for, to other forms of public service that can do a lot of harm if they are misused, like the military, they too would probably act quite a bit differently. But to your point, one extra thing is that you're 100% right. It's a tried and true pathway for a lot of folks. And I've had soldiers as well that I had been responsible for as an officer that have now become police officers. But it is also true that veterans are the most likely group of police officers to draw their weapon on another American.
Okay, well, that is very interesting. But I mean, in terms of our context as sort of analysts of Afghanistan, it's actually quite maddening that you've got a lot of people. I know I've spoken to Sangar about this as well. You've got a lot of people saying things like Black Lives Matter, and obviously we agree with that. That is true. But then they're also pro-war and occupation abroad. Isn't that the case, Sangar?
Yes, sadly, I think that's one of the main themes that we have picked up in the last few weeks is, on the one hand, we have a growing group of people who are obviously dissatisfied with endless war in Afghanistan. And then we have a group of people who are saying, no, presence of foreign troops in Afghanistan has its merits. It has its benefits for Afghanistan. But at the same time, the very same people, you see them saying like, we are against police brutality in America. We are against excessive use of violence in America. So this comes primarily from Afghan Americans and other people who are aware of what's going on.
My general 2 cents is that I imagine that a lot of the people that are protesting for Black Lives Matter also acknowledge that use of military force in Afghanistan or across the greater Middle East is also a problem. I think that there's several different reasons why there isn't as much pressure applied to that, rather than something that's directly home in their community, because they can see it in their community. You can't see what's happening in the greater Middle East. It's also been going on for 19 years. And for many Americans, they just sort of have forgotten it. And that this is just the standard operating procedure, that America is just sort of in a permanent war posture. That's just what the military does. And there aren't a whole lot of questions being raised, which is deeply problematic. And I mean, I think that I hope with a progressive society, that if you start at the closest bit, you probably have the greatest amount of sort of love or empathy for those who are closest to you, right? Your direct family, and you might have more, feel more closely for those people than distant relatives, and you feel more closely for them than just some random person in your community. and you have more, respect for them perhaps, or more closeness to them than somebody in your country more broadly, and it ripples outwards. And there are, the same thing applies if you wouldn't do something like this to your own children or to your own kids, or own family members, own people in the same town. Well, you shouldn't be doing it anywhere.
Yeah.
But I don't think that human society has fully grasped that we are all individuals. And if we talk about equality, which is, allegedly, an ideal of America, that it's very difficult to say that you've reached equality when you look at these contradictions in the face, because by virtue of going to war, you cannot be equal, because to raise a weapon and aim it at another human being, you are decreasing or marginalizing their moral significance as another human being.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you decrease their moral significance as another human being, you are not treating them as an equal. So for as long as there is war, there is not equality.